New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
New Thought Media Network proudly presents On Purpose with Reverend Beth Linguri. Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Mountain Time, 3 p.m. Central European Time. Come find purpose, nurture growth, and live your passion. And now On Purpose with Reverend Beth Linguri.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to On Purpose. I'm Reverend Beth Linguri, and today we have a wonderful broadcast. We have the privilege of hosting a remarkable individual on our program. The Reverend David Ault, a dear friend, esteemed colleague, and a source of inspiration for me and for many more, will join us. David, welcome.
Reverend Beth, it's so wonderful to see you. Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. So I'm going to give a brief introduction. Is that okay for you?
Okay, I'll look down. No. Brief is the operative word, yes.
Okay, David describes himself on his website as a visionary leader in the human potential movement who has promoted mindfulness, global literacy, and social justice for over 30 years. That's a long time. But I know David as a speaker and an amazing inspirational speaker and leader, and he has come to our conferences here in Switzerland. Mm-hmm. But his career is actually a testament to the commitment to education and social change. He's made so many contributions as a teacher, author, minister, global education advocate, writer, author. He's written 2 books, Where Regret Cannot Find Me and The Grass is Greener Right Here, both of which are amazing. He's an adventurer who has hiked the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu and trekked across Spain, and again in Portugal recently on the pilgrimage, the Camino pilgrimage. And he's even summited Kilimanjaro in Africa. And I remember you came to us after that.
That's true.
But he has also founded the Kaleidoscope Child Foundation, which empowers vulnerable children and communities with sustainable education, life skills, and fresh water. I hope we'll hear more about that during the broadcast. And he has been a much appreciated and beloved guest speaker and teacher at our summer conference in Geneva, where he has joined us many times, most recently in 2022. And you currently live in Atlanta, Georgia. Is that correct?
That's true. Yes.
Well, welcome, David, and thank you for joining us. And would you like to add anything to your introduction?
Just a thank you for those invitations to Geneva. That place and those people and that environment was one of the most profound, nurturing, beautiful experiences of all the retreats and conferences I'm sure that both of us have been to in our lifetime. Those remain at the top, and I owe that to you. So thank you so much.
It was our privilege and pleasure. And I remember when David Serlin in the UK suggested you as a guest for our second year, the second year we held the conference. None of us knew anything about you. And then you come and we're just overwhelmed. So we invited you back the next year. You were such a wonderful speaker and so real, so authentic, and so inspirational. And we all left with our lives changed, that's for sure. Mm. So, David, I know that this broadcast On Purpose is focused on this idea that we come into this life with a purpose, that we have a reason for being here. And it is, I think, as you say on your site, to express the divinity within. It's the only way that we can express the only way divinity can be expressed is through each one of us. And so that is our our major purpose. And the words of Joseph Campbell, when he writes this idea of follow your bliss, don't be afraid. When you do this, you put yourself on a kind of track that has been there all the while waiting for you. The life that you were born to live. Doors will open and you'll be helped by hidden hands. Find what gives you a sense of being, a sense of mission, a sense of participation, and follow that path. And I remember at our first conference when you spoke, you shared an experience that you had as a minister. You were a religious science minister or CSL minister, and you were also leading people on a spiritual journey, I guess, a travel journey of some kind. Could you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah. I like the Joseph Campbell quote that you just shared. I think some of the words in that you said were, it's there waiting for you. Such a powerful thing to reflect on, to think about, that which is your purpose, or that which is, shall we say, meant for you, is already there waiting for you. And so it's a call to action, to movement, to busting down any kind of sedentary fear or mental self-created limitation, and just to be able to experience the fact that it is there and you're far more capable than you give yourself credit for. But we don't experience that tangibly unless we're out there, boots to the ground, being willing to have those adventures. And so what precipitated that tour or that travel was actually started in childhood, because I grew up, I tried to say stereotypically poor, because my situation wasn't unique. It was just sort of a carbon copy of what so many people went through with limited means and impoverished background and that kind of thing. And so it was in this small Southeast Texas town. And part of my escape, or my soothing, self-soothing, was I would climb trees and I would read these books about famous people. And what I began to notice, even as a little boy, was that all of these people and all of these stories that I was reading, every single one of them had adversity. That adversity and what I was coming to understand was not unique. It wasn't just solely me. That was a common occurrence within this human curriculum. And yet, through their actions, through their willingness, to show up and to meet whatever it was that was waiting for them, I would read about their results. I would read about their inspired inventions. I would read all of that. And I remember thinking, wow, if they can do this, so can I.
Wow.
And that's the beauty of education. That's the beauty of reading. That's the beauty of being willing to lift oneself out of their own situation and look around, and to allow inspiration or allow something to pull you into a greater sense of being. And so books were that for me. And I just remembered that really fed this sense of longing to see the world, to see a world that I knew nothing about except through books, to have these types of adventures, and yet not knowing how that would ever be possible. And then jump forward many, many decades. I have lived life a little bit. I'm in my late 20s. I meet a woman that most people in New Thought are familiar with, named Louise Hay. I get involved in music and travel with her. And so I become saturated almost immediately, almost immersed into this mindset of New Thought principles and being enough, and looking at things like limitation and consciousness and whatnot, all things that were foreign to me in my upbringing. And I credit that saturation and immersion for really sort of holding me and anchoring me in a new willingness and in a new taste for something more with regards to life and what it held for me. And one of the ways that that was happening was through music. And so we traveled with Louise as a trio. And then I branched off into a solo career. I will say, thanks to Louise's name, it opened a lot of doors for me as a young man, as a singer and a traveling musician. And so I sort of carved out this weird career that I really didn't know very many other people who were doing it, by traveling to spiritual centers and trying to book myself in conventions and things like that to be the singer. I started to record my own music. Well, in the process of all of that, we remember the days of email lists. So I was developing email lists when they actually meant
present the email list.
Yeah, when they actually meant something, when they were a prized commodity. And one of the musicians that I came across at that time said, you can use that email list. There are these travel companies. And he told me one specifically from China. And he said, you can travel to China for free. You can see the Great Wall of China. All you have to do is get 15 people to sign up and all of your expenses are paid. That was revolutionary to me. And I followed through on that. And that first advertised trip, 45 people signed up. And I was like, oh my God. And I had all of this mythology in my head, like, oh my God, I'm going to have to know everything in China. I knew nothing, but that wasn't the case. There were guides there. I was just sort of the figurehead. I'm the one that had to sort of make sure that everyone's needs were met. And I felt good doing that. And it felt right within me. And all of a sudden, here I am, without ever having been able to construct that on my own, climbing the Great Wall of China and making a little bit of money. And I thought, oh my God. And so one thing after another, one trip after another, sacred site journeys sort of became the norm for me, expanding my name and those experiences and connecting with people globally. And I did that for many, many years. And it fed that sense of adventure from that boy in the tree. And it was so incredible. And it reminded me of that. Do you remember there's a Mark Twain quote? And he starts out with, travel is fatal to prejudice.
Oh, wow. I don't remember.
Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. And many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. And so I remember that so vividly, and it was true. It was true for me. It opened up worlds for me, particularly being a part of other cultures. What it also inspired within me was wanting to experience the people and the culture beyond just the tourist things. And but it was, it was a door opening to that. But I would say it's now in the early 2000s, and I am presented an opportunity to take people to Cambodia and Thailand, neither of which I had gone before, neither of which I knew much about. And I didn't know that Cambodia was the home for one of the greatest spiritual temple complexes in the world. And people signed up, particularly for Cambodia. We went to Thailand first, which was lovely, and we had a great time. And then we did sort of this, they call them puddle jumper planes, over to Cambodia for 3 days. So we packed a smaller bag. We left stuff in Thailand and off we go to Cambodia. And I've shared this with you before. The moment that I touched the ground, I felt something. And I'm sure all of us who are watching have had similar experiences. For me, it was just really like, wow. I learned very quickly about Cambodian history, about their incredible civil war that took place in the 1970s, the genocide that
Genocide.
eliminated more than 2 million Cambodians. And so being there in the early 2000s was merely 30 years post Civil War.
Right.
And there were
So
still,
you had this urge, this kind of inner feeling when you touched down. What was it like that you?
it was just, I don't even know if I could describe it as a feeling of home, but there was this palpable equanimity and affinity for these people. And strangely, it was also for almost every single person in that group, the first time that they had ever experienced what I call the delineation between the haves and the have-nots.
Mhm.
And the haves were us. The haves were the tourists, and the have-nots were basically the Cambodian people. And
Mhm.
at that time, which is different from today, at that time, tourism was the main functionality of the country, but it wasn't at the level that it is today. And so there were still so much of the remnants of that Civil War, the landmine victims, all kinds of people who were struggling and really, really leaning on tourism to sort of save them. And so it was very emotional. It was very raw for a lot of people. And here's what happens, I think, when those of us who are traveling or coming from Western environments see that for the first time. There's all this sort of bubbling up of wanting to do something, of wanting to fix it. I call it a sincere empathy. And
Yes.
yet one learns to develop a skill around that in the most effective ways, but push that aside. It's the first time. And so that here we are in consensus wanting to do something. I'm glad that I was naive about the ways of the world back then to some degree, because I may have censored or overanalyzed the situation, but I was equally rushing into wanting to do something just like everybody else. And so the only person we had to rely on was the guide. And I said, look, I have 15 people. We all want to do something. We're here for a very limited time. And I know that it would be considered like a one-off, not sustainable. So is it possible that in our itinerary with the temples, we could do something as a group? And I said, perhaps maybe take us to the worst situation. And
Okay.
he looked at me like I was a two-headed goat. And he was like, what? And I said, no, sincerely, I said, if it's going to be a one-off, why not maximize that opportunity? And
Mhm.
so that developed into this lengthy conversation about logistics and things. And we settled upon the fact that there's a famous lake in Siem Reap. In fact, it's the largest waterway in that part of Asia, and it's called the Tonle Sap. It was the dry season. And he said, so in the dry season, all of the refugees and the landmine victims and the displaced and the orphaned and the worst of the worst all congregate there. And they sort of organically support one another. They put these little makeshift huts in there, and they stay there as a almost like a refugee camp until the monsoons return, and then it all collapses and off they go. And he said, if you go there, you will see kids who are essentially starving.
Mm.
And I was like, okay. And so the group and I talked to the guide, and he said, you can't just show up. You can't just bring anything. I would recommend that you find things that are indigenous to their digestive systems, on and on and on. So we were really being thorough as much as possible. So we agreed that we would go to these markets, these local markets where most of the locals get their weekly produce and things. And that's where we would purchase food. We ended up purchasing what is the equivalent of 3 side-by-side markets worth of food. Like everybody was in on it. They were like, yes, 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 yes. And the guide was going, okay, we can bring that. Okay, we can bring that. And we had to order more vans. And so we put all of this food in these vans. And then he said, you can't just show up. I have got to get a message to the matriarch of this village. So interestingly, even a transient village has a matriarch. And to this day, I don't know how he did it, because cell phones were not rampant at that time. Somehow, by the time we got from the market to the banks of the Tonle Sap Lake in these vans, there were over 100 children uniformly lined up in like the cake bed of the lake on the edge. And we started to disperse the food. And for about 7 minutes, it was orderly. And then all chaos broke out. All chaos broke out. And many people were overwhelmed, because off in the distance, you could hear this running of all of these other children who had either heard about it or saw it or something. And it became this grab fest. And we were doing the best that we could to unload everything out of the vans and distribute the food. And then just like that, it was over.
It was gone.
Just like a tornado. It was over. And we stood there and sort of, I remember everybody breathing heavy. And this one woman, whose daughter I have since talked to, and she verified the story. I thought she had a white shirt on, but she said, no, my mom had a white skirt on, of all things. And on this white skirt were all of these little muddy handprints of the children who had been grabbing for the food. And she started to sob.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that sometimes in those situations, it's sort of like yawning, that once somebody starts to do that, then everybody else starts to do that. And then everybody's crying in their own fashion. And then all of a sudden I can feel it coming up for me. And I have this picture in my mind that I'm supposed to hold it together because I'm the leader. Mm-hmm. But this is different. And to this day, words diminish this experience. But I will say that physiologically, it felt like my heart burst.
Wow.
And I began to wail. And I had to
wail, sob, crying.
But interestingly, and this is really key, that it wasn't out of pity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I saw a pontoon boat, and I crawled on my hands and knees into that pontoon boat, and I started wailing. And in that experience, which has been unlike any other experience I've ever had in my life, these words came to me. It was a quote, actually, that I would practice with sometimes. And it was from a writer named Doug Boyd. And he said, the most powerful mantra that you can ever say is, I'm available. And then he said, look out. Because if you're sincere, your whole, or committed, your whole world will change. And in that pontoon boat, on my hands and knees, just wailing, I kept saying, I'm available, I'm available, I'm available. So fast forward, I went back 5 years in a row thinking that this would be easy to find something to do. It wasn't. I was just gobsmacked at how many people were indifferent because they didn't have the same picture in their mind as I did. And it was a huge humbling learning lesson of observing people and their receptivity. I learned so much. I took so many things personally, which was not beneficial at all. I had to mature a lot in order to move into the new skin of the person who would be able to do something from a sustainability standpoint. And in 5 years of going back, I finally got the paperwork approved for what is called an NGO, a non-government organization, which was needed in order to open a school. There are many stories in that 5 years. But I will say that in 2009, I got the paper. And by 2010, I had raised a little bit of money, enough money, and had gotten my own nonprofit status here in America to fund all of this. And so I had a little starter money, and we built a little framed outdoor pavilion, which became the first classroom. Jump forward to today, and we have not only 2 schools, 2 campuses in Cambodia, but we also have 2 schools in India. And we work with literacy programs in Guatemala for girls who are experiencing slave labor practices. We are helping fund somebody, Wilkester, in Kenya. We managed to get a grant to be able to gift to her on a yearly basis, which is helping her schoolwork there. And so everything has evolved into what is called Kaleidoscope Child Foundation. And the main emphasis, the 3-legged stool, if you will, is sustainable education, clean water and hygiene, and then life skills development. Right. And so there are a million stories of all the different things that we have had to build from scratch, and then watch it crumble, and then rebuild it again, and all of that. And but I attribute that and the development of what we could call this life purpose from that mantra, I'm available. Mm-hmm. And then having to keep my agreement with it.
Yes, because on that, you had moments of saying,
"Oh my God,
good enough for this. I'm not big enough." Or
there were so many years where the money didn't come through, or I became so emotionally invested with regards to certain children and what's going to happen, and I have learned so much about the paradox of keeping my heart open and also not being attached. Again, probably one of the greatest practices of my human life is being in the arena and watching myself having to let go of the attachment of what I want it to look like.
What you want it to look like.
And that is the biggest thing about nonprofit work, particularly in developing countries, because it's every day something is changing. Yeah.
It is. And so you followed that I'm available and took next steps. Mm-hmm. Right. And you would just take the next step, and then you would take the next step. And during that time, we often do that, and then we lose our sense of purpose. We lose our sense of, we become overwhelmed with the need for patience, with, constant change. And what you said, things didn't work out the way you planned or the way you wanted them, or you had, I know that you had some trust issues with people that that worked for you.
And I think that what happens is one has to become comfortable with, let's call it the zigzag. It's not a linear line. Purpose never leaves. You could say that we leave it. Because it's steadfast, but it's going, okay, you're going to go this way. Okay, you're going to go this way. And that is a muscle that must be developed by us. It is already there. It is the thing that keeps calling us home, but we get fixated on the pictures in our mind, and yes. like that Mark Twain quote, I didn't know so much about cultural nuance and communication, and I have learned such in-depth practices to be able not only to speak to people who English is not their first language, right, but to also learn the nuances and the cultural exchanges that go on. For example, in Cambodia, you won't get a straight answer. What you will get is an answer that they think will be pleasing to you. And talk about madness, specifically when you got this linear mind here going, give me the facts. And so that has taken on a whole new pathway of of learning and, again, nuance, and being able to be patient enough to get at the core to where all of a sudden we're having a very realistic conversation. Same thing in India. How many times things are lost in translation, and so the assumptions, and I could say, as Mark Twain says, just the basic ignorance, all of those things are sort of healed and elevated when you're there. But
Correct.
you're not going to find them by reading about it. You got to
No.
be there, boots to the ground.
Boots to the ground. And you say that you gained so much wisdom through this process of cultural immersion, so much change in your own way of viewing the world and the way of viewing others. So how do you manage to keep up with that kind of do you have a spiritual practice? What do you do to manage those moments of despair or disappointment, or it's not going your way?
I continue to be available to learning. It's interesting. When I was, so as you were talking about, been a platform minister for decades and decades, and then kind of stepped down from that because Kaleidoscope really was this sort of full-time demandment. And then the sort of the catchphrase out in the world was thought leader. And then I tried that on for a while and I went, I'm not a leader of thought. And I'm like, what a weird title to give oneself. So I erased that. And then it was like spiritual teacher. And sometimes even spiritual teacher is like, no, I'm just a sharer. Because I'm just a sharer like everybody else. And I'm in the sandbox learning over and over again. And what I love about teaching and sharing is that I learn just as much in the process as those who are, let's say, coming to me to participate. And so my spiritual practice is, as our founder, Ernest Holmes, would say, always checking my sincerity around being open at the top. Because we can say that and we can nod our head and go, oh, that's such a delicious phrase. But we have no idea just how solidified we can become and how opinionated we can become about certain things. Again, unless we put ourselves into this availability to uncover new depth and new insight. I've been in a 4-month Tibetan Zen meditation class, and it is just sort of like beat me over the head. And it's good because I'm like, wow, there's so much to learn. There's so many ways in order to travel this path towards freedom and liberation. And so to answer that question, it's continuing to open myself and make myself available for whatever wants to call me.
And how do you find out? Do you listen, or how do you know what's the next thing to do?
Sure. I think it's becoming familiar with what we might call synchronicities. I think it's becoming familiar with paying attention. And so it isn't about, I'm going to go hunt and find what that next course is going to be. It's about being aware in the moment and make it a game. So much of our so-called failing is the efforting, but some of the success is just in simply relaxing and letting the day be a sort of experiment. I can't tell you how much success, these are all human words, inventions, but how much success people feel when we reframe things and say, okay, instead of thinking of this as homework or thinking of this as a task, let's think of it as an experiment. So for this day, we're going to experiment with this. And then that level of breathability and ease and experimentation and lightheartedness makes those mindfulness practices and those awareness practices so much more palatable than this idea of, oh, I've got to do this because. And so, like you, I applaud you for launching this particular avenue of expression for you. And isn't it beautiful to know that there's no finish line?
That's correct. That's right.
No finish line.
You just open at the top. Stephen Covey talks about life as a crescendo,
Yeah.
always expanding. And no matter where you are in your life, you're always expanding and creating, and something new comes and you create and you go more and more. So this attitude of being open to synchronicities, for things to see if something is synchronistic and following it through. So you have to be relaxed, surrender.
And yeah, and so one of my big takeaways from this meditation course these months is that the awareness of just, first of all, the divisiveness that exists within the human plane, particularly, let's say now with all the political stuff. And are you able to sustain that equanimity and the constancy of that which you may call spirit, you may call God? Are you able to be in the arena of that and still maintain that? Or how seduced are we with regards to the peace that exists? Where are we in the integrity of our own spiritual principle that tells us that God is all that there is in the midst of all this chaos? And again, I've never been able, maybe you can find this. I've never been able to find where Ernest Holmes wrote this. I think it may have been in practitioner material, but he said, oftentimes we will think that we will use phrases like never before in the history of, and that's not true. History is cyclical. It's been just as equally divisive, if not more so, even more brutal than we are experiencing now. Sometimes we want to make this special, and it's not. And so when you start to think of the plane of form or human existence, it's just the cyclical curriculum that the soul has to navigate to become aware, to remove the Maya or the veils of illusion. And that's not going to happen if you and I are not in the world. Being in the world, being in the midst of poverty, being in the midst of inequality, being in the midst of this divisiveness, and practicing not being swayed from the absence of the principle is a lifelong process.
It is a lifelong process, and this is the deal. It's the principle, coming back to the principle and connecting with that and seeing how that's going to unfold in your life. The truth is that all the power we need is within us, and we have access to it through our daily practices and through our decisions, but we keep forgetting. And so we get off track, and then we get into a situation that we're not happy with, and then we begin to say, oh, what's going on, and come back. The person you long to be, you are already. Something I have heard you say.
Yeah. I remember just thinking about striving. We're constantly striving and hoping and looking for the person or the course or the situation to fix it for us. But the thing that we long to be, we already are. And if one can grasp that, if one can understand that solution that they crave already exists, if one can understand that the wholeness that they seek is in the apparent absence of it, just waiting for that exploration, then it sort of takes the world and humanity and flips it. And we start to see that nothing is as it seems. And again, that's a practice. If the person that I long to be, I already am, how can I create an experiment and for today, walk around in the embodiment of that? How can I get more clear about who that person is? If that's true, what is that person doing in the world right now? And then experiment by role playing, if you will. I mean, that was such a beautiful part of Neville Goddard's teachings. One of the great metaphysical writers was all about assuming assuming the consciousness of that which you long for. And those practices work. They're very helpful. They're very helpful to shake the sleeping self, to break up the inertia that is in us, and to get us to understand that we are constantly creating, constantly collaborating with that which is infinite. And that's why I love, we have these meetups here in Atlanta, and we kind of listen to a lot of Ram Dass material, who did a lot of lectures and teachings and discourses on aging, conscious aging. And we will have young people and old people. And it's been so incredible to watch the merger of that, those particular levels of expression find one another and play off of one another and dialogue off of one another. And I think that that's really critical for us. You know, if I'm on one end of the spectrum as a young person, I want to find an elder and I want to learn what mentorship is. If I'm an elder, I want to be able to be open to the wisdom of the youth. and it works not to give my wisdom, but to be available for what it is that they are bringing into this world right now. And there's so much. If we say, I don't know where to find it, we're not paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
We're just not paying attention.
Just not paying attention. So paying attention, being aware, being observant, looking around, those are important qualities. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So what would you say for our audience today on, let's say they leave here and they say, I want to really awaken to my own personal magnificence. I want to go that route. What would you advise first steps? And do you have any resources that are available for others to access?
You know, what's weird, what comes up, because this has been coming up for me this week, is completion. I have been noticing a running theme in the people that I work with and counsel, that many of the things that feel turbulent inside of them are remnants from a lack of completion, whether that be a physical action or a relational thing or just a resolve within themselves. And I say to them, you know, completion is an exercise that you can use every day in every moment. You could be sitting at your desk and you say, okay, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go make a cup of tea. And you could use the activity of that and bring it to completion and come down and then observe how that feels. That same level of ability exists in all forms of completion. If there is a relationship or a conversation that needs to be cleaned up, what is available for you to complete that? If there is unfinished business, if there is something that is sitting on the back burner of your life that wants to be pulled to the front part of the burner, then is that something, that gnawing a lot of times is because there is this element of completion that is missing within them. Just by practicing these little moments of completion, you start to see a little bit of how we're wired. And with so much incompletion, whether it's through fear or lack of or feelings of unworthiness or unlovable or unskilled or all the things that we buy into, those things begin to sort of disrupt the ground a little bit and make it more fertile, break it open a little bit. And just those kinds of granular things. There's a beautiful book called Atomic Habits. Atomic Habits. I tell people to read that book all the time because he talks about incremental changes.
Yes.
And I think people could listen to you and I dialogue and they can nod their heads genuinely, but it's too overwhelming for them to then turn it off and know what to do. So start small. Pick something within that day and complete it. And over time, you start to see then that and completion again is also a paradox, because being the purpose is never complete, but you can let these incremental stops along the way come to light that perhaps have never been given the opportunity to do that before. And I think that has proven to be very successful. I'm going to do a whole April class on completion, because I'm like, wow, this is really up for people. So there are so many practices like that. I would tell people to go to the book Atomic Habits.
And I agree. That's a wonderful book. And he's now developed a program, an app that you can have on your phone, and also you can have messages sent to you every day. I receive from him every day some messages, and you're right that those small steps, just one small thing, like
just one thing,
completing your cup of tea, finishing, putting it back, just anything that you do in your day to bring something to completion gives you that sense of completeness that you can carry on to bigger things and more things. That's fantastic, David. So where can we find out more about you? What is your website?
David Ault, spelled AULT.com, and then Kaleidoscope Child Foundation.
Kaleidoscope Child Foundation. I know we're going to be
KaleidoscopeChildFoundation.org. So there is always something there to explore. And here's open at the top opportunities. So supposedly there's going to be a documentary made about Kaleidoscope in January of 2025. So if this documentarian and company gets their funding, I'll be going with a crew to Cambodia and India.
Oh, well, they'll do a documentary of your programs there.
Yeah, and I guess a little bit of me, but the emphasis will be about the children and going into their lives, going into their homes. And we've built some wonderful relationships over all these years with that, and showing the evolution and also the fruits of what education has done for them. And I'm really excited about that. So
that will be amazing. That will spread the word far and wide, will it not? That's wonderful. So this Kaleidoscope Child Foundation is just an amazing organization, and it has it was 20 years now that the foundation.
It was the story that we told. It was 20 years in January.
Wow, that's amazing. And now you have schools in Siem Reap and in a
village called Nokra Krau in Cambodia, and then in 2 in India, and then this amazing literacy school program in Guatemala that we work with, and again, Wilkester School in Kenya, Africa, that bless her, boy, she's just, that's a lot. I know exactly what she's going through.
One of our practitioners in our center in Kenya, and CSL center in Kenya, and she's has a school, and she's doing so many other things, as is the whole center there. So that's a great work as well. Well, thank you, David. Anything else? Last words that you would like to share as we close?
Just so good to see with you, and I bow in gratitude to you, and I just affirm great success and joy as you embark upon this new creative venture.
As I go in my life, right?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and this has been great, and we'll just keep in touch. And we want to hear more from you later down the road, especially about this documentary. So thank you so much, David.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. Join us again next Wednesday for more of On Purpose with Reverend Beth Linguri, only on New Thought Media Network. Learn more at www.ntmedia.org.